Thomas Church, and to all the people who are joining us via the live stream. So today as you know, the month of February in the United States and Canada is Black History Month, an annual observed commemorative month originating, also known as African American History Month, a time really to celebrate the immense contribution of the African American people to the history of this country. And I am particularly grateful to one of our parishioners, Pamela, for introducing us to Dianne Harris, who is joining us from Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. She will tell us more about this, for a talk about keeping the story alive 60 years later. So just a few words about Dianne. She's a native of historic Selma, Alabama, and became a committed activist in the civil rights movement at the age of 15, actively participating in several pivotal marches, including the iconic Bloody Sunday. She was arrested twice for her courageous stand against racial injustice. Over the course of a lifelong dedication to equality, Dianne has been honored with numerous accolades, including the Congressional Foot Soldier Medal and Certificate. A passionate public speaker, she is frequently sought after by media outlets for her insights and reflections on the ongoing struggle for justice. As a Selma historical tour guide, Dianne also shares her personal narrative with visitors, educating others about the civil rights movement. And I believe that this is the way in which Pamela met you, Dianne, and the connection was made. So we are really grateful that you accepted to speak for us today, and eager to hear what your story and what you have to share with us today. Thank you.
Good morning. I bring you greetings from historic Selma, Alabama. I am Dianne Harris, and I was a 1965 student foot soldier during the voting rights movement here in Selma. Many of you may not know, but I'd like to share with you that Selma was chosen as one of the major voting sites because of a man by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson. Jimmy Lee Jackson did not live here in Selma. He lived in a small town called Marion, Alabama, which is some 29, 30 miles west of Selma. And the Black citizens of Marion were already protesting. They were having night marches. But Mr. Jackson was shot, and Marion didn't even have a hospital there. So he was transported to Selma because we were the closest city to Marion that had a hospital. He lived for some 8 days and then he passed away. He was shot so brutally that his intestines were protruding. But then there were two groups of leaders that conducted the marches here: SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and then there was SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Well, one of the ministers from SNCC was held at a mass meeting one night at historic Brown Chapel AME Church. He he shared his information that his sentiments were that he would like to carry Mr. Jimmy Lee Jackson's body to the steps of the Capitol, which is in Montgomery, and present it and place it on the steps so that Governor George Wallace could see it. Well, the members of SCLC diffused that idea. They did not think that was the proper way that Dr. King would want to handle anything. So that's really how Selma became, as we say down south here, ripe for the picking. Then this gentleman, Reverend James Bevel, was the speaker that was speaking these words. He also asked, well, I want to march. Who will march with me? And that's when the entire this was not really all members of Brown Chapel AME Church. These were members, not members, but citizens of Selma. Brown Chapel, the church can hold about 400 people, so the church was packed to capacity, and everybody stood up and said they wanted to march. So that's how the march to Selma really got started with the, I guess you could say, the emphasis of Jimmy Lee Jackson's body. He was also eulogized here at Brown Chapel, but that was because his home church was too small, and the news media had really started coming to Selma, and a lot of press was going on here, publicity, and that's how the movement really got started. But I'd like to share with you that I am a child of the Jim Crow South. That means that um, everything was separate but not equal back in the day. Uh, all situations were segregated here in the South. But our parents faced, when I say parents, I'm really referring to the community at large. Our community, especially our Black citizens, I'd like to share with you some things, a little show and tell if you don't mind, had to take a test, and it was called the Alabama Literacy Test. And this test included 68 questions. It was very difficult for our people to pass this, for many of them to pass, the majority of them to pass this test, because they had very little education. Not only if they had the education, but the wording of this test was so difficult. I've been told by people that have a PhD degree that this test is difficult to pass. But our parents were faced with this test, and it was stated that the registrar at the courthouse here in Selma took great pleasure in stamping the word denied on the test. And most of our people didn't get past page 2. So first, I'm sharing with you a few things that our parents and our community had to face in order to try to become registered voters. So first, it was this literacy test, 68 questions. Then another example I'd like to show you, I'm holding a mini jar of jelly beans in my hand. But back in 65, there was a gallon jar of jelly beans. I guess you say, what do jelly beans have to do with the test? You're right, absolutely nothing. But these were some of the things that were used in order to discourage our people from wanting to register vote. Forgive me, I downsized to a small jar because when I do my speeches, it's difficult to carry a gallon jar around. Our folk were asked to guess how many jelly beans were in a jar. Then the third thing I'd like to share with you is I'm holding a bar of soap. How many soap bubbles are in a bar of soap? So I've listed 3 things: the test, the jelly beans, and the soap. And the fourth thing I'd like to share with you, I can't show you, but I'll give you the question. The last thing was, how many drops of water are in the Alabama River? The Alabama River is the river in which our iconic Edmund Pettus Bridge crosses. So these were 4 ludicrous examples that were presented to our folk in order to discourage them from wanting to become registered voters, and believe you me, it did. Well, there were 3 major groups of marches. There was the Ministers' March, the Teachers' March, and the Student March. Of course, my brother and I, there were 2 of us. I was 15 at the time, and my brother 13. We wanted to become a part of the Student March because many students were already marching. We have 2 school systems here in Selma. We have the Dallas County school system and the Selma City school system. Well, the 2 of us never attended either one of those schools because we attended a small private school called Alabama Lutheran Academy and Junior College. which later became Concordia, Alabama. But the students from the other two school systems had already begun marching, and we decided that we wanted to march. But the reason for that was not just to be a part of, well, we were typical children wanting to be a part of doing what the other students were, but the main concern was our parents were not registered voters. We all wanted to see our parents become voters because we felt they deserved to be so as well. So again, there were three marches, the Ministers' March, the Teachers' March, and the Student March. I'll share a little bit with you about the Ministers' March. The Ministers' March consisted primarily of, predominantly, of Black ministers, all from Selma and surrounding areas. But I need you to remember, and I'm proud to say, that there was one group of white ministers. This minister was from Birmingham, Alabama, but he had originally lived here in Selma. He was a Lutheran. Still is. He's living to this day. He's in his 90s. He was a minister and pastor of a Lutheran church, but a predominantly Black church in Birmingham. He decided to write letters, extend invitations to ministers all in the Birmingham area and ask them would they be a part of the Ministers' March. Well, he was able to get 71 white ministers to join the group. I'm very proud to say that because I am Lutheran by church denomination, and it was good to see someone of our church faith leading those marches. So do remember that there was one white minister that did participate, and his name is Reverend Joseph Elwanger. Reverend Elwanger resides in Milwaukee presently. But then I'll go on to the Teachers' March. The Teachers' March consisted of the teachers here in Selma and Dallas County. Dallas County is our county seat. The teachers there were beginning to march. And believe it or not, they did not fear about losing their jobs because here you had educated people that were not registered voters. And so the teachers held their march. Well, the students at the Selma from the Selma City School System and Dallas County School System had no problem because uh, they knew that their teachers were on board. But here we were at our little small school, and we were told not to march because participate because our instructors feared for our safety. Well, we did too, but being typical children, we wanted to participate. So those were the three major marches. Okay, I'd like to say that I participated in a total of, oh, let me share some other things with you. When we marched, we carried hand-lettered signs that said, "Let our parents vote." This is one of my favorite writings on a poster that I can remember some groups of students carrying when we marched. Of course, we had no computers back in '65, so that was a computerized sign you just saw. They were written by hand, and some were even written on paper bags, grocery bags, notebook paper, whatever. But when we carried those signs, we were very proud to be able to say we were marching. My school, the students that participated at my school, Alabama Lutheran, there were about 18 of us. We were a small school, maybe 400 in registration numbers, enrollment, but only about 18 of us decided that we would participate. But we left school on a Monday. We ended up staying out of school for 1 week. However, the students from the Selma City School System and the Dallas County School System had already begun marching, and they had been out of school for weeks at a time. But I guess you say, what did we do during that entire week that we were out? Believe it or not, it was a very serious matter. We reported to the churches, the two churches, historical churches, either Brown Chapel AME Church, The AME stands for African Methodist Episcopal Church or First Baptist. And those two churches are located about a half block from each other, within a half block range of each other. But at any rate, we participated and went to those churches, mainly First Baptist, because it was the headquarters for the students. And every morning at 8 o'clock, we were there just as if we were at school. But it was called a freedom school. Freedom school. So, what did you do at the freedom school? The first thing we were taught and told that if you could not be nonviolent, you were asked not to participate because we would have been defying everything that Dr. King stood for. And then we were taught safety rules. By this time, I'm getting very nervous. Safety rules? Why do we need to know safety rules? Well, believe you me, we did. Because our very insensitive and unkind, for lack of a better adjective, sheriff had a group of men called possemen, Posseman. He deputized these men, and they were from our rural area of Selma. They were highly recruited if they owned horses. So in many of the movies you may have seen, especially the Selma movie, you might have seen horses, men riding on horseback. Well, these men were deputized by a local sheriff. They had, and hear me well on this, they had absolutely no law enforcement training at all, none. Again, they were highly recruited if they owned horses. They were given two instruments, a billy club, or you may call it a nightstick, and a cattle prod. For those of you that may not know what a cattle prod does, it makes cattle move. It's like an electrical taser. So those two instruments were given. And I sarcastically say they were given a little Rin Tin Tin badge by our local sheriff. And it really made these possemen feel that they were greater than the Alabama State Troopers. These men wanted to be a part of violence so bad that they even purchased their own uniforms. They were all in uniforms. They wore khaki long sleeve shirts with the matching pants. But again, they were highly recruited if they owned horses. So we were taught safety rules. And some of the safety rules were the first, we were asked, what is the most important part of your body that you would try and protect if you were approached by one of these possemen? And of course, I'm thinking you all would probably say, as I'm about to share with you, your head. We were taught that cover your head if you see one of these men coming near you with a billy club, because it would be more important to, they said it would be better if you had, which is sort of weird to say, but rather than have a head concussion, it would be best if you had broken fingers or a broken hand. So cover your head. Your head would be the most important part of your body that you would want to protect. By this time, I'm getting very afraid, but not afraid, not enough, afraid enough to want to give up and say, I don't want to be a part of the student movement anymore. Then we were taught, usually when you're taking speech lessons, you're taught to look your audience or a person directly in the face or eyes for direct contact. We were taught the opposite. Do not look what they will call our oppressors, because they did oppress us. Do not look your oppressors in the eyes. Said when you are marching, pretend you have on blinders. Don't look to your left and don't look to your right, because that will cause them that will give them just cause to want to harm you. And so then the list just went on, but we learned many freedom songs, freedom chants, things of that nature. Then we were taught you never knew when, where, how long if you were arrested. You never knew what day you wouldn't know any of that because no one told us we're going to arrest you today. You just started marching, and all marches always begun at Brown Chapel AME Church. So you never knew what day you were going to be approached and arrested. But then we were always, I'd like to share a little bit about you with the mass meetings. Mass meetings were, first of all, I'd like to say they were very inspirational. Every mass meeting, and they were always at the churches, the two churches mostly, were very inspirational. They began with scripture and prayer. Those were the first two items on of every mass meeting. Then you had the freedom songs were sang and the chants and whatever. And I'd like to try and give you a snippet of, I'm going to try and just sing. I'll try and put a little medley together. It'll be very short. So if my voice sounds like a little frog this morning, it's early in the morning. But I just want to give you a flavor of what some of the freedom songs were. The first one, and I'll try and do three, but they'll be very short. The first one is titled "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around." And I love this song so because it was the very first freedom song that I learned. And it goes, ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. Ain't gonna let George Wallace turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let George Wallace turn me round. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. Now, if you miss me from the back of the bus and you can't find me nowhere, just come on up to the front of the bus. I'll be riding up there. I'll be riding up there, hallelujah. I'll be riding up there. Just come on up to the front of the bus, and I'll be riding up there. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me, over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. I've just shared three of my most favorite songs with you, but the highlight of all the songs for me would be um, We Shall Overcome. We Shall Overcome was always the song that ended every mass meeting. And that's still one of my very favorite songs as well. But I'd like to share a little bit about what the freedom songs, and allow me to read, please. The freedom songs were the soul of the movement. The songs spread our message. The songs bonded us together. The songs gave us courage. The songs shielded us from hate. The songs forged our discipline. The songs protected us from danger. And the songs kept us sane. As you heard, these songs, these adjectives that I described at the end of each line, they were very, very powerful. And those songs were very meaningful and they helped us get through the bad situations which we had to go through. I'd like to share, and I'm going to hold this up and hopefully you can see it. This is a smaller version of a picture of 7 marchers, student marchers that were marching. And it was not until the 50th anniversary, and I hope you know that we're beginning to celebrate our 60th anniversary this coming month after next in March. but this was at the 50th anniversary. This is a picture of 7 marches, and I'm on this picture. I hope you can see it. I have a little sign that I'm pointing a star. I'm pointing, that's me at age 15. I had no idea that I would ever see a picture where I had participated in a student march. The National Park Service erected a kiosk, which is located on the corner of one of the historic churches, First Baptist. The National Park Service erected this kiosk some 10 years ago. And lo and behold, we saw photographers taking pictures every time we marched. But after 50 years, I'm sure you would forget that you had taken a picture too. Well, they decided to pull this picture out of their archives, and there I am on this picture. Sadly, my brother is not on this picture. We marched always, most of the time together, but obviously he was with some of his buddies that day and didn't get to be on that picture. But that's my proof and my claim to fame, and I humbly say I'm proud to be able to show that I was there because indeed I was. However, thousands of students participated, and many students ask, how did you all get to be chosen to be on the kiosk? My answer is simply, we had absolutely nothing to do with the selection of the picture. The National Park Service pulled it from their archives, but my final response is, I'm mighty glad they did. I'll go on by saying I participated in a total of 4 marches. Here are some important dates I like you to remember. Of course, Bloody Sunday being March 7th, and then Turnaround Tuesday being March 9th, and then the Selma to Montgomery March, March 21st. Well, as I said, I was arrested on 2 occasions. Yes, I proudly wear the term of the title jailbird because I was arrested. It's an honor to be able to say that you actually participated in a cause that would lead to voter registration. My first march was on Bloody Sunday. My mother allowed my brother and I to march, but she asked us not to march. Well, no, I'm sorry. She told us we could go down to the church, but do not march. Well, this is one time I was disobedient, but I felt it was for a good cause. When we got into church and heard that one of those wonderful songs and speakers from SCOC and Sneak Speaking, I whispered to my little brother and said, let's get to the back of the line. And he reminded me, he always fondly called me Di for short. He said, Di, Mom said, don't march. I said, I know, but we're going to be fine. We're going to be at the back of the line. He was a little fellow, and he kept saying, Di, Mama says, don't march. But we'll be fine. I actually drug him outside of the church. I did keep my promise because we were at the back of the line. And as a Christian, I say it was God's saving grace that we were at the back of the line that day. I never claimed the fame that I crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday because I did not. I tell my story very honestly. I said I attempted, and to me, being there was just as important. But it was a blessing that we were not on the bridge that day, because as you all perhaps may remember, that was the day that it was called Bloody Sunday. A lot of blood was shed. Many marchers were attacked and brutally beaten that day. Being at the back of the line did have its advantage because the first thing we encountered was the smell of the tear gas. It burns your eyes, gets in your hair, your clothing. It does make you cry. Then we start hearing the marchers screaming and crying. And the last thing we heard were those horses, heard those horse hooves. That meant that those possemen that I described to you were coming back on the Selma side, chasing the marchers back from the bridge. That was the day I encountered my first case of violence. My brother and I had to run back to the church, and the church was always called our safe haven because I say the two churches, Brown Chapel and First Baptist, because they were always left open. But sadly, on our way there, being 15, you called everybody old. I now know what it means to be called a little old lady. But there was this little lady, she may have been in her late 60s or 70s, and she appeared to have a limp. I asked my brother, I told my brother, let's ask her, can we get on each side of her and help her run? Well, we really couldn't help her run. It was more like a trot. Well, she did that for about a block and a half. And finally, she begged us profusely, saying, children, go on. I can't keep up. We begged her, said, ma'am, we only have just a little ways to go because the possemen are coming. Those men on horseback. We finally had to leave her because she broke away from us and she just said, children, I don't want you all to get hurt. You all go on. Well, as we look back, this was one of the saddest moments of the movement that I can remember. That when we look back, a posseman was actually beating her profusely with his billy club, and she was yelling, crying, and screaming. Of course, we in turn started crying as well. My brother says, we better run. We held on to each other, held hands, and ran as swiftly as we could to the church. Well, when he finished beating her, I have you to know that he came behind us on horseback. I have very vivid memories of he on horseback running behind us. He chased us up on horseback, chased us up the steps of Brown Chapel Church. My little brother barely missed the violence because he was slinging his billy club. So that was my first march there. I'll go on by saying I was arrested. My first arrest was every march began from Brown Chapel. And as I stated earlier, you were told you never knew when, where, or how long you would be arrested. When we got to march from the church to the courthouse, when we got there, we saw a fleet of yellow buses. Those were school buses. We said, oh, somebody's going to be arrested. Well, that day, some 225 students were arrested. We were told and spoken to in a very demeaning manner, get on those buses. And we had remembered, you don't talk back, you don't say anything, you don't look at these men because that will give them any reason to want to harm you. On each bus, there were two possemen. Like I said, 225 students. We were transported to a real prison camp. We had been told during our uh, meetings at the Freedom School about Camp Selma. Camp Selma was only 7 miles from Selma, but that was the slowest bus ride. And I think it was done purposely to intimidate us and make us afraid. When we got to the prison camp, of course, we all could read. We were high school students. We saw this big sign that says Camp Selma. Now, again, these were Jim Crow days where everything was separate but not equal. We as Blacks had to enter the back of everything except maybe a department store, your restaurants and whatever. But this time we were escorted to the front door. And that was because that's where the equipment was placed or housed or whatever. Equipment meaning we were processed, meaning with fingerprinted and mugshots taken. Yes, we were treated just as if we were criminals. This was February of 65. We spent the entire night, the rest of the night there. It took longer to process us than for the time frame that we spent the night. I can remember the law enforcers coming by the jail cells. Some 25 to 30 girls and boys were arrested as well, but at least 25 people per cell. They had even taken the cots out of the cells. So obviously, the law enforcers knew someone was going to be arrested. Well, They couldn't take the toilet out, so they left the toilet there. But however, they rattled those billy clubs across the cells. That was to intimidate us and make us fearful, and believe you me, it did. We were released like 6 o'clock that morning, brought back to the courthouse, and I say dropped off like a sack of potatoes. My brother and I rushed again, we held hands and ran home because we were trying to get home before my mother was scheduled to go to work. My mom worked at the most racist factory here in Selma. It was called Bayuk Cigar Factory. She made cigars. We didn't own a car, so mom was waiting on her car pool ride to come and pick her up. She was so happy to know that her two children had were safe and had gotten home before she was scheduled to go to work. I'll move on by saying that was arrest number one. Several weeks later, by the way, we went back to school after the first week. We were only out, the students from Alabama Lutheran were only out for a week, but we continued to march after school. My second arrest was one day after school at, again, the march is always begun at the church, but this time we didn't have to be transported because the place where we were arrested was called the National Guard Armory. The National Guard Armory was where the National Guardsmen would come and do their monthly guard duty. Large building. That building still exists here in Selma, and Pam got to see that building. It's in very deplorable condition, but it's still there. Um, there's a picture on the internet that shows our mean old sheriff at that time standing in the alleyway with billy club in hand, escorting us to the back of this building. We didn't need to be transported. You were told don't ever leave out of a line if you were marching because staying together symbolized unity. So you wouldn't want to leave out of the line even if you were marching because the possum were always with you. Hundreds of them marched with us with billy club and nightsticks in hand. I mean, billy club, nightstick, same thing. Billy club and cattle prods in their hands. That night we didn't have to be processed because the equipment for processing us, the fingerprint and taking um, was not housed at the National Guard Armory. We spent the entire night there, but that was a very brutal, horrible night. The girls were told to sit on the floor, the filthy floor, concrete floor, Indian style, and the boys were told to press the wall. That was a night of just terrible violence. The boys were struck with the nightsticks, and of course they had been taught to cover their heads, but they struck them by hitting them across their arms, their buttocks, their thighs, you name it. And of course, we all were crying. There were hundreds of us in the National Guard Army that night that had been arrested. Well, they spared us girls from the billy club, but not from the act of violence. They meaning the possum and these same volunteers, randomly stuck the girls um, with their cattle prods. Unfortunately, I was one of those girls got stuck in my right arm with the I'm sorry, yes, with the cattle prod. It's like a taser. It sends an electrical shock to your body. And yes, it makes you cry, scream, yell. That's one night I wish I had uh, been at home with my mom. So those were my two arrests. I go on to say my last and final march was to Montgomery, but I need you to hear me well on this one. One night at a mass meeting, and my mother was able to go to the meetings with us at night because felt that was safe. Um, because even employers were out scouting to see, especially in the daytime, where any of their workers participated in the march. But my mom felt that marching at night. I mean, going to the mass meetings at night would be safe for her. So she attended the mass meetings with us. But maybe like the Thursday before the major march to Montgomery. Well, the marchers had already started leaving Selma because it took them 1 week to get to Montgomery. But then this particular night, we were told that if you wanted to go to Montgomery, a fleet of buses would be provided for you. Well, we were taught not to talk in church, but I was so excited. I whispered and I asked my mom, Mom, can we go to Montgomery? She didn't say anything. I was so persistent. I asked about 3 times, and the third time she gave me a nice firm hunch, a nudge, and I knew to be quiet then. But on the way home, I still asked Mom, can we please go to Montgomery? They said a bus will be provided for us. Well, we were told at that mass meeting, says, bring your quilts with you because you will be sleeping, you will be spending the night in Montgomery the night before the major march, which would have been March 24th. The buses were leaving Selma on the 24th. I say that to say, says, bring those quilts with you. Said, at that time, Black people didn't have sleeping bags. Said, bring those beautiful quilts that your ancestors made because you're going to be sleeping on the grounds of St. Jude Catholic School in Montgomery. Well, finally, Mom decided she would answer me. And she says, yes, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let the both of you go. She said, because I know who you'll be with. You'll be with members of SCLC. You'll be with either SNCC. You won't be on a violent school bus. You will be on a bus with members of SCLC and SNCC, as I stated. And I know where you're going. I know when you'll be coming back. So I'm going to safely say I'll allow you to go. But promise me one thing. And at that time, I was so happy. I said, yes, ma'am. Anything. What? She says, promise me that you all, the two of you will stay together. Yes, ma'am, I promise. Well, Mom was able to see us off on the 24th that evening around 4:30. We walked because we didn't own a car. We walked down to the church with our quilts, and she gave us our hugs and kisses, and she said she would pray for our safety. And we were told to get on the bus. Remember your bus number. Those buses were Greyhound buses. As far as the eyes could see, all the way down that street. At the time, the street that Brown Chapel was on was called Sylvan Street, Sylvan. It is now called Martin Luther King Street. As far as the eyes could see, it was Greyhound. There were Greyhound buses. I tell everybody, and I honestly say, I got to Montgomery, but I did not march one step from Selma to Montgomery. But the main thing, I was there. I got there, and I got there safely by way of Greyhound bus. When we got to Montgomery, I'm about to close that part. When we got to Montgomery, we saw it was an atmosphere set up like it was going to be a concert, and it was. That concert, and it's documented, is titled "The Night the Freedom Stars Fell on Alabama." They didn't mean the celestial stars from heaven. They meant the actors and movie stars. I'm going to name a few, and perhaps you can recognize some of these names. Joan Baez, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Sammy Davis Jr., Eartha Kitt, the Cartwright Boys on Bonanza. Many of you may watch westerns, Adam Hoss, Little Joe, Ben. And the main person that had organized, and the list just goes on, but I was just giving you a few. They presented us with a wonderful concert, complimentary. And the main person that organized that concert was Harry Belafonte. I think every high school girl had a crush on Harry Belafonte, especially when he came out singing Dale, Dale. Daylight's coming and I want to go home. But at any rate, after the concert, we were given serious instructions on how to march 2 by 2. Do not look your hecklers or your oppressors. Keep looking straight ahead as you had been taught earlier. But at any rate, that was my participation of marching. We came back home, and that day was, of course, going to the Capitol. That was the icing on the cake because we heard Dr. Martin Luther King give his famous speech. And we called it his how long, not long speech because he used that terminology. But hearing Dr. King speak to some 25,000 people of all races, all creeds, all church denominations, it was a beautiful sight. But the day was dampened when we got home and heard the nightly news. We heard that one of our civil rights martyrs, Viola Luzo, the Detroit housewife, had been shot and killed. I'm about to end by saying President Lyndon B. Johnson passed the Voting Rights Act August 6 of 65, but it was not until October that the citizens of our Black families were allowed to become registered voters. They said they had to knock the kinks out. And I sarcastically say, well, the kinks, the literacy test, the jelly bean quiz, soap bubble quiz, whatever. But at any rate, my mom proudly became a registered voter, and she never missed an election physically until her last year because her health was failing. I was able to persuade her to become the vote absentee, and she did. And back in the day, in the 60s, you had to wait until you were 21. I had to wait until I was 21, but I have never missed an election. As of today, I still don't. The struggle still continues 60 years later, and we're still fighting for many rights. We know voter suppression has raised its ugly heads. The struggle still continues. I'm so proud and blessed to be able to say in closing that I hope to be able to say come March, I would have lived 60 years, but it saddens me very deeply that things are not better as I thought they might have been. It's like we're going back in a complete circle, reverse.
Thank you, Dianne. Thank you, Dianne, very much. I mean, this is really, you can't hear, but our friends here are applauding you, and I think it's a very, the least I can say is that we are very grateful for not only for your testimony today, but also for the battles you fought. Because it is thanks to these battles that even if, arguably it is true that in some ways we are going back, but at the same time progress has been made, an example has been set, and there will be people who will carry on the fight and the banner. So, well, thank you very much. This was really inspirational, and as I told you earlier, we look forward to you coming to New York and to speak in person next time.
Okay.
So we'll have to unfortunately conclude you here because we have mass in 10 minutes. But I will relay to you any question, our friends, both here in person and online, might have. For the time being, we thank you very much, and we send you our thoughts, our gratitude, and we will bring you in our prayers during Mass today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dianne. God bless you.